So welcome back. We're again here with Friends of Flow, and my name is Tess Judge Ellis.
And this is Andy Witters here. And Tess, we have an awesome guest.
We do, Andrew. Yes, we do.
And so we have Dr. Kay Ball with us today, one of the national leaders in smoke mitigation. And so, Tess, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kay Ball.
Welcome, Kay. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having this interview and including me. This has been a passion of my life, surgical smoke, for years. I'm a past president of the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses and past president of their foundation, too. I'm also a professor of nursing in Otterbein University in Westerville, Ohio. I've been a perioperative nurse since 1975.
Wow.
And that was my calling, to go right into the OR. And I've been very involved with laser technology. I've written 4 editions of Lasers, the Perioperative Challenge. The last edition just came out in February of 2018, just this year. And so when I got involved with lasers in, 1985, I became very aware of surgical smoke. And I've had this passion since 1985. I started noticing it more and more and more when I got involved with laser surgery. That's when it was kind of brought to the forefront that we need to evacuate surgical smoke. And we do a good job with evacuation of laser smoke because we taught people, you bring in a laser, you bring in a smoke evacuator.
Sure. But
it's electrosurgery that seems to be the plume that we just breathe in all the time today, because we use electrosurgery a lot more than we use lasers. The main hazards of surgical smoke are the odor. That's an awful, offensive odor. We can talk more about that too. And the size of the particles. They're ultra-fine particles, very fine particles. Number 3 is the potential for viability of what is being transmitted within that plume.
So, Kay, you talked about the research that you did in your dissertation. Can you talk specifically about the research methods that you used?
Well, I had a survey that I put together, and I validated the survey, and it used Rogers diffusion of innovation. So I looked at the nurse, characteristics of the nurse. I looked at his or her perceptions of how difficult is it to evacuate surgical smoke. Do the smoke evacuators actually work? Is that their experience? And then I looked at the organization they worked in. Was it a multidisciplinary? Was it one type of surgery? And then I used all that information and I asked questions like, do you use a smoke evacuator always, often, sometimes, never for a mastectomy? Do you use an inline filter always, often, sometimes, never for a hemorrhoidectomy? Do you use it for tonsillectomy? So I had a vast amount of procedures, and when they use smoke evacuators, complying with what guidelines say you need to do. And then I took all that information, and through statistical analysis, I was able to pull out those very general results, like if they had knowledge about the hazards of surgical smoke, they were more apt to comply. If they worked in a large multidiscipline type of environment, more apt to comply. Good, strong leadership support, more apt to comply. If they had smoke evacuators available, they were more apt to comply.
Okay.
So that's how my research was done.
How many surveys did you send out and get back?
I got 777 back. I sent about 2,000 surveys out.
And these were sent to OR nurses, OR leaders?
These were sent to AORN members who were working in surgery and working with devices that produce plume.
And it sounds like it was a not qualitative, but
Yeah, it was quantitative, and there was some qualitative.
Excellent. Sounds like it was broad-based, and you had
right. And so it was done in 2009. So I would love to see this, and there have been people request my survey so they could replicate that in Ireland. I don't know the results of that yet, but I would love to see some of this replicated so we'd know where we are today, 10 years later.
Well, that's a great feather in your cap too with your research, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if there are other places that are wanting to replicate your study, I mean that shows that your study has has weight and has meaning, especially to the practice of these nurses.
Well, and even more specifically, the tool. It sounds
Right,
like you
yeah,
created your own
absolutely.
survey tool as a part of your dissertation too.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And using Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations model, how accepting
Yeah.
are we of making changes in our practice
Right.
was significant too.
Well, that's spoken like a true nurse, right? I mean, that
Right.
nurses are known to just get the job done and adapt to whatever is on their plate. We're just
Right.
good at that. So
Yeah.
you've
And
been
how do we
doing
deal with complacency? And there was some that nurses were
Yeah.
complacent, saying, "I don't want to be bothered."
right, yeah, yeah. Which can be a barrier in instituting change.
Absolutely.
at
I
times.
identified 4 barriers in my study, but every OR environment has their own little barriers because they have their own culture. But my
Right.
barriers were the nurses said they weren't evacuating plume because they didn't have the equipment available.
Right.
Or the second one was the surgeon said, we don't have to do this. And the third one was the equipment's too noisy. Industry is making them less noisy and less noisy. Now smoke evacuators can automatically turn it on and off when plume is created. And the fourth barrier was staff complacency.
Yeah.
And so we found out that you just have to educate
Right,
them.
right.
If they rationally know why it's so important to evacuate plume, then they become proponents and they like that clean air smell now.
Excellent. I'd like to talk about what is in surgical smoke. What makes it such a hazard? You mentioned in the 80s you noticed that it had a foul-smelling odor. Well, can you tell us a little bit what the research says is in smoke?
Well, the research, we can talk about the toxic gases in surgical smoke. There have been identified over 150 toxic gases. That's what forms the odor. And some of those gases are carcinogenic, like formaldehyde, benzene, acrolein. Benzene has been shown to be the trigger for leukemia. Formaldehyde is what we set specimens with, and now we don't breathe in directly formaldehyde when we put formaldehyde on our specimens. So these toxic gases are one of the major problems with surgical smoke. That gives it the odor. And then the other problem is the ultra-fine particles that are in the air. Dr. Mahashi in his research years ago showed that 77% of what's in the plume is 1.1 microns in size and smaller. Now, a regular surgical mask filters 5 micron in size particles unless it's a high filtration mask that will filter down to 0.1 micron in size. So those toxic gases are going through the mask. The particles are sometimes going through the mask and going right down into the nurses or the techs or the surgeons' alveoli of their own lungs, because that's the size that they are. They're very, very small. Electrosurgery particles are the smallest, and then the next largest is ultrasonic particles, and then laser particles are larger. But where do they go? They can go right into the alveoli of our own lungs, or we're sucking them right into the wall suction and starting to occlude the wall suction. So the suction doesn't work as well in surgery. Sometimes it's even shut off in the middle of a case because of all this occlusion of sucking in particles from surgical smoke for so many years.
I have 2 questions, Kay. One is, what happens to the smoke once it's evacuated? Does it go through a filter system or?
Yes, smoke evacuation is a 2-step process. You have to collect the plume, and that has to be a really good suction pull. The wall suction only gives you plus or minus 5 cubic feet a minute pull, but a smoke evacuator can get up to 50 cubic feet a minute pull. So the velocity of the tip of that collection device is extremely important with a smoke evacuator. So the smoke evacuator has to be strong enough to evacuate that plume. So you collect the plume, and then you're going to filter the plume. It's a 3-step process. There's usually a little collection device that will collect any moisture and large particles, but then your ULPA filter, your ultra low penetration air filter, will filter down to 0.1 microns in size at almost 100% efficiency. Much, much better than a HEPA filter. So smoke evacuators need to have ALPA filtration. And then to get rid of the odor, we have charcoal filters. Coconut-based charcoal is most absorptive, but charcoal filters will absorb those odors and get rid of the odor, all those toxic gases.
So then
So we have to collect it and then filter it.
So where does all that go then? Does it get is it like a hazard material, like a hazmat pickup? Is it so once it's done, you know what I'm asking?
When the filter is all contaminated and the machine says you got to change the filter, because usually they have lights that will come on saying they need to change the filter, you can put that in a red bag and then that can be put into the landfill. There has never been any reports of a contaminated smoke evacuation filter transmitting disease in a landfill. But aesthetically, we think of a contaminated filter, we want to put it in a red bag, so we have to make it unrecognizable and disinfect it before we put it into a landfill.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a whole issue in and of itself, is what goes into landfills.
Well,
so smoke evacuations do the job. We just have to use them. We have to get them in every single surgical room, and we have to use them appropriately.
Well, I like what you mentioned about using a yank hour suction, just a regular suction that's meant to pick up fluid, and some of the research out there has suggested that quote unquote regular suction will actually assist in spreading that smoke plume throughout the room. Because if it's just going through, depending on how the suction containers
there's no
set
filter,
up,
there's no charcoal thing or whatever.
So if there's no filters, it's just being spread throughout a room. So that's another sort of just.
Well, I mean, you think you're doing a good job when really you're not doing the good job.
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
all the more reason to use the right tools, like you described, Kay, and
exactly,
and the right material that's already out there. Right.
We have one other problem in surgery suites. A surgery suite is required to have about 20 room changeovers an hour. So we have little currents of air going on inside our ORs. That makes it an OR. We don't want debris settling down into an incision. So we have these room changeovers going on. So if you don't have a smoke evacuator, you're just allowing the plume to go everywhere. Right. These little ultrafine particles are getting caught up on those air currents and being distributed nicely throughout the whole operating room.
Right.
So I could be circulating a case away from the table and be breathing in as many particles as the person who scrubbed at the table.
Right.
But the problem is, research has shown that it takes about 20 minutes for these air particles to actually land on a horizontal surface. Mm-hmm. So we're hurrying at the end of a case, we're still using electrosurgery, we're making this smoke and it's not being evacuated, and we get the incision sewn up and put a dressing on it, take that patient immediately out, clean up the room very quickly, and bring in the next patient. Well, if it's within 20 minutes, some of those particles are still settling now down on the next patient.
That's right.
It's an infection control issue. We need to evacuate plume where it happens, when it happens, and then we wouldn't have any of these problems to deal with. One more thing, you go into a hospital or a healthcare facility, you see on the front door a sign that says this is a smoke-free facility. And many nurses want to go down there with their magic marker and put except in the OR. Uh-huh. And it's so true that if we are truly a smoke-free facility, we need to be smoke-free everywhere within the walls of that facility. And that includes taking care of the smoke and getting rid of the smoke in surgery, because we have the technology, we just have to use it. We have to understand why it's so important that we have to use that.
And for me, it sounds like it's just there are ethics behind it, workplace safety, patient safety. It again, this seems like it's just the right thing to do.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, Kay, you can you talk a little bit about Ethicon and how they've moved forward with this and educational opportunities and such?
Well, Ethicon's been a huge supporter of perioperative nursing. When I was president of AORN, they were always there understanding what nurses need to help their patients. But right now, Ethicon, and along with their newly acquired company, Megadyne, are very involved with surgical smoke education and making products to be successful and effective in evacuation of surgical smoke, making a safe, smoke-free environment for us. In fact, I'm a paid consultant with Ethicon, and I do lectures, generic lectures on the hazards of surgical smoke and how easy it is to get rid of smoke in surgical environments. And so Ethicon has promoted education throughout the United States on understanding the hazards of surgical smoke and how easily it is when they show their products on surgical smoke evacuation. They're very effective. But I have to commend Ethicon as part of J&J to always be interested in workplace safety issues and giving us products that will make our life as perioperative nurses a lot better, that we can give the best care to our patients. So Johnson & Johnson's always been one of the world-class leaders.
It sounds
in
as though they
education.
listened to nursing, and they did listen, and they saw the problem, and they moved forward trying to come up with creative solutions, and they keep modifying those, it sounds like, too.
At what point, or have you seen, in your opinion, a turning point with smoke evacuation? And can you speak to that just a little bit?
I think over the last couple years, I've seen a huge interest in surgical smoke evacuation. More and more, I go every year to our AORN Expo, and this year, we have lots of different smoke evacuation companies on the floor. We had a couple companies speaking at their booth on surgical smoke for CE. And so I think over the last couple years, I've really seen a huge interest in this because AORN has the Go Clear Award now and is making it easy for members and other people to have a smoke-free environment. And with an organization as highly reputable as AORN and as trustworthy as AORN, for them to really, really push this, even though they've been pushing it for many years, I think that's very important.
So it's like, Kay, you can stretch out and go, hey, my work now is done. You guys take
Not
it
yet.
over. Not yet?
Not
Okay.
yet. We have to take over OB because
Yeah.
OB, when they use electrosurgery, produce plume, and it's an awful offensive odor. We had a patient who was going in for her first C-section, wrote a letter to the hospital president after the C-section saying, I thought this was going to be a pleasant experience, but your department stinks. She had no idea she was smelling her own plume that they were creating during the C-section.
Yeah.
The hospital president found out what the odor was from, and immediately they got smoke evacuators in the OB department.
Patients.
For wherever plume is created, you have to have smoke evacuation, whether it's in intensive care and you're doing something to debride something at the patient's bedside, you need to have a smoke evacuator. Or in the ER, or doctors' offices. When they use hyfricators, you're producing plume in doctors' offices. That's where, when all that is smoke-free, that's where I'll say my mission is done.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Well, that's
I
good.
would toast to that. Toast to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Toast to change.
Yeah.
So let's take a nice deep cleansing breath of good air. And like Kay, we asked you to think about something if you were a new nurse or a younger nurse going in and wanting to be an advocate, even not necessarily with smoke evacuation. What would your words of wisdom be?
My words of wisdom is if somebody has the passion and the excitement to work in surgery, then we have to provide clean air for them to promote this passion. So with new nurses coming in, I would say mandate that you're going to have a smoke-free environment because nurses want to work in clean air environments.
Yes.
Well, that's phenomenal. Thanks again, Kay, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kay. Thank you.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share my passion.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it's contagious, and hopefully we'll get that message out that every OR needs to have smoke evacuation if surgical plume is created.
Great, thanks.
I think
This
we
is
can.
Friends of Flow. I'm Tess Judge Ellis.
And this is Andy Witters telling you to agitate, innovate, and educate.
I say keep your eye on the patient.
This podcast is sponsored by Ethicon US LLC. The information contained in this podcast and findings and conclusions expressed are those reached independently by the authors. Copyright 2018 Ethicon US LLC. All rights reserved.
Well, welcome back, folks. We're Friends of Flow. We're excited to be back and here with you. My name is Tess Judge Ellis.
Good morning. I'm Rebecca Porter.
And good morning, ladies. This is Andy Witters here.
great. We are excited because we have some special guests coming to us from Denver, Colorado. We have Mary Ogg and Danielle Glover, and they are with AORN. So first I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves a bit and tell us a little bit about AORN.
My name is Mary Ogg. I'm a senior perioperative practice specialist. I've worked at AORN for 12 years, and prior to that I have about 30 years of experience working in operating rooms across the country. AORN stands for the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses. We're the world's largest nursing organization for perioperative nurses. So we represent over 160,000 nurses, operating room nurses across the country. And we provide nursing education, clinical practice guidelines, standards, and professional development for perioperative nurses and the team.
That's great. Danielle, why don't you introduce yourself then also?
My name is Danielle Glover. I'm the Associate Director of Government Affairs here at AORN, and my job is to manage the state government affairs and state legislative affairs and represent our members at the state capitals across the country.
Well, that's great. And so today, for this podcast in particular, we're talking about smoke plume evacuation. And so I guess, Mary, if you can talk about how that came of interest to AORN and how long AORN's been interested in this topic and where it comes from and your overall priorities.
Well, AORN has been involved in smoke evacuation priorities since the mid-90s. In the mid-1995 and 1996, they convened two different conferences that brought interested stakeholders together to discuss smoke evacuation. We had representatives from American College of Surgeons, ANA, as well as regulatory from OSHA, NIOSH, and as well as accrediting bodies such as Joint Commission. And they came together to discuss this issue, and the outcome of that talks were that more research needed to be done about smoke evacuation.
Wow, and did AORN convene that meeting?
Yes, they did. It was funded through our AORN Foundation. And then we've been advocating for smoke evacuation since then. It's been in 3 different recommended practices that we had. It was in our electrosurgery recommended practice, laser safety, as well as minimally invasive surgery. And then as fast forward about 20 years, as more and more information came out about what's in surgical smoke, we decided to make it its own standalone guideline. That there was that overwhelming evidence that talked to what are in the contents of surgical smoke and why it's important for our perioperative teams to evacuate smoke.
And I bet you that NIOSH is really interested in that stuff. Is that right?
Yes, NIOSH has funded a few studies about surgical smoke. Neither one of those has been published yet. I had a sneak preview, but I'm not allowed to share what they found.
Right. They're keeping
Right,
that.
sure.
That's, I mean, you're in the forefront of that with them. And what an exciting partnership, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that guideline process is fascinating.
Well, the standalone smoke safety guideline was released in 2017, and it's still currently in our book. Our guidelines are on a 5-year cycle of being updated, so it's in that interim period right now before it'll be updated again.
Wow.
So once we get back maybe 500 to 1,000 articles, the author would go through those and decide which ones they want to look into more detail. And then once we get those articles, it gets called down to maybe 500. Then the author goes through each and every one of those articles and appraises it for its level of evidence. We also bring in subject matter experts on certain topics to help us review that too, to make sure we're on target. And then once that draft is done, it goes up on our website for public comment for 30 days. And that gives everybody an opportunity to comment on that. You do not have to be an AORN member to comment. We welcome comments from everyone.
It's a call out to staff nurses to keep an eye of public comment time. In addition to being a member of their local chapter, to being a participant in those development of those guidelines.
Yeah.
And I just want to take a clip of what you just said and put it in and say, here, young student nurse. This is exactly where nursing voices need to be,
Right.
and nursing leadership.
Absolutely.
So we want to hear just a little bit more specifically about the smoke evacuation guideline and then the recommendations. And we actually put a prop out, which is from AORN. This is their practice guideline.
Great. Happy to see that. So in the guideline, there are 5 broad recommendations, and I'm just going to down here. The first one is that your healthcare organization should establish a smoke-free workplace environment. And this is important that you do an evaluation, and it's based on OSHA's hierarchy of controls, is that you go in and look to see how can you remove the smoke. Is there any way to eliminate the smoke altogether? Can you use engineering controls such as your HVAC system? Or do you need work practice controls using that smoke evacuator? And then administrative controls, having your policies and procedures, and then finally PPE, that N90, surgical N95. So it's based on that OSHA model, is that your organization should evaluate. Do we have multiple rooms that are generating large amounts of smoke? Or are we a ambulatory surgery center that does primarily cataract surgery where we're not generating smoke? Then you don't need to worry about it, because
Sure.
you may have one puff of smoke maybe once every 100 cases, but it's not like you're in a case, maybe a plastic surgery center where you're doing large cases where you're always generating that large amount of smoke. So that's the first recommendation. And number 2, and this I think is the meat and potatoes of the guideline, is that the team should evacuate all smoke. And this goes into the nitty-gritty details about if you're going to evacuate smoke, that evacuators should be as close as possible to the surgical site, and so that all that visible smoke is removed. It talks about what type of evacuator to have. Another important thing that is in here is that it stresses that one team member should not make the decision for the whole team about evacuating smoke. And I
Nice.
think
Nice.
this is really important, that it should be a team decision, not based on just one person's opinion.
What's the third recommendation? Just a little light reading, it looks like.
I know. This is where all the evidence is, sorry. The next recommendations get in kind of the nitty-gritty too of having education and competencies in smoke evacuation. As I said earlier, I think education's the key for people to know about what's in smoke, to motivate them more to want to evacuate it. The competency part comes into that you know how to use the equipment, that you can hook up that smoke evacuator, that you know when to use one particular evacuator over maybe using the suction. And then recommendation 4 is having those policies and procedures. And this is also key, to have a strong policy and procedure, and not just to have that policy and procedure, but that policy and procedure is enforced and backed up by your administrative level and your leadership team. You can have everything written down in a book that sits in an office, but unless it's being actually referenced and enforced, then it's just a piece of paper.
For sure.
And then the 5th one is a quality assurance program. And going back to Go Clear, they help you implement all these things as well. You have, in our Go Clear, we have the education piece, we have the competency piece, we have the quality piece, and we also provide a sample policy and procedure in that Go Clear resource packet. So it helps you implement this guideline. You don't have to do it on your own. We've done all the legwork for you. I'm very proud of it and proud of AORN for doing this, is that it's a total package. It has everything that we have been able to think of that could help a facility go smoke-free. From how do you make that commitment that you want to be smoke-free? How do you get leadership support? To having tools there for the gap analysis. Do we have enough smoke evacuators? There are some facilities that have a smoke evacuator already in every room, but they're sitting in there gathering dust. They haven't been used. So some facilities
Wow.
already have the equipment. So we need to know, do they have the equipment they need? Do they have the evacuators? Do they have the disposables that they need to evacuate smoke? And then I think this is the cornerstone of our program, is our education modules. There are 6 online modules that you can complete in about 10 to 15 minutes for each one. You can do one at a time, you can do 2 or 3, or all 6. And I think that's the key here, is for people to be empowered with the knowledge of what's in that smoke and how they can advocate for themselves, for their patients, and for the rest of their team, that this is not good for us to be inhaling this smoke. And then also within the program is an audit tool, so you can figure out how many rooms and how many surgeries are actually evacuating that smoke. So it's a total package and resource. We have a program manual that walks through the steps. We have dedicated personnel. We have a program coordinator for the program, as well as the clinical consult for the program if anybody has clinical questions regarding going smoke-free.
So there's award levels that institutions can have, correct?
That is correct. We've made it a 3-tier level. We have a gold, silver, and bronze award. And to achieve the gold level, you're about at 90% across the board. So 90% of your staff have completed the education, 90% received a passing grade, you're evacuating smoke 90% of the time, and that you have enough equipment actually to evacuate the smoke. The silver is below that, it's about 70 to 90%, and then the bronze is down at 50%. One of the reasons we made it a 3-tiered level is that we wanted to recognize incremental progress. So if you're a facility that's never evacuated smoke and you start doing it at least 50% of the time, you can still apply for this award and get the bronze. We want to recognize that you're making that effort. Gold is, of course, the best, and hopefully most everybody will achieve that, which to date we've had 38 facilities that have achieved the Go Clear Award, and 37 of those have been gold, and we do have 1 silver awardee. Once they have completed their audit and completed their education, they submit for the award, and that packet is evaluated and the award granted. It's awarded for 3 years, and then we're going to have plans for a recertification. It is free to any facility that wants to participate in applying for the award. A great story that has come out of the Go Clear program is that one of our facilities that won the Gold Award wrote back and said that prior to going through the program, the surgeons did not want to evacuate smoke. The staff went through the program, went through the education, and the staff in the room started spouting all the facts and around the smoke and how bad it was, and that they didn't want to be exposed. And so the surgeons started evacuating smoke, and they've gone on to win the Gold Award. And I just think that's so powerful, that when we have multiple voices expressing our concerns, is that we can move this forward, rather than one person just saying, I want you to evacuate it. If you have the circulating nurse and the scrub nurse and maybe even anesthesia saying, we're in this room all day, we don't want to be exposed to this all day, we want you to do this, I think there's a little more peer pressure to evacuate that smoke.
This is just a no-brainer. When you think about the safety issues that exist within smoke, chemicals that are there. Yeah. I mean, this just seems like the right thing to do.
Exactly, and it's not just that it's one case. It might be you breathe that in for 8 hours a day, and then 5 days a week, or again, you might be in the OR for 30 years. And so, what toll is that taking on our teams that are in the operating room? And so, each and every researcher said, evacuate smoke. And it came out loud and clear to me, and I was just reviewing some of these articles again the other day, is that each and every one says, evacuate that smoke. And so I think that's the message we need to drive home, is that it needs to evacuate it, whether it's a little bit for a small case or whether you've got a tremendous amount of smoke in some of these larger cases, such as abdominoplasties or breast reconstruction. Initially, we thought of this as a recruitment and retention tool as well.
Exactly, yeah.
We value you as an employee. We're going to make this environment smoke-free for you. And so that makes me want to stay. As recruitment, if I'm moving to a new area and I find out that St. Elsewhere has the Go Clear Award and they're committing to be a smoke-free environment, maybe I'd rather work there than someplace else.
And it's crazy when you think it does take, what did they say, 17 to 20 years to make a change in a culture, and you guys have done it, so congrats. We are
Thank
going to
you so
have to
much.
shift on to governmental affairs. And so as we get going on, Danielle, can you just introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about your background with AORN?
My name is Danielle. I'm the Associate Director for AORN's Government Affairs Department. What that means is that I represent AORN at the state level in both the legislative and the regulatory environment. So I work really closely with our members to make sure that they're trained to be good advocates and that they can communicate their message to legislators and to regulators effectively.
How did the legislators receive you and receive nurses? Everybody loves a nurse. The Gallup poll has us at the top of the trustworthy professions. And so how are they received at the legislature?
Well, the great thing about working with nurses is that everybody loves nurses. The legislators are sometimes shocked to hear what the nurses are exposed to surgical smoke, that this is still an issue. And I think that they're also appreciative to hear that there is somebody that is in that room that is being the patient's advocate.
Excellent. And you guys had recent success in Rhode Island with some legislation that was passed. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Rhode Island is a success story because it's an example of us not only passing legislation, but of our members stepping up and making sure that their voices were heard. AORN stepped in to spearhead this initiative by engaging stakeholders, bringing people to the table, working with our members to communicate again their stories and their experiences with surgical smoke. And we engaged folks like the Rhode Island State Nurses Association as we pursued the legislation. There's a lot that happens with policy making. It's a multi-year process. When we are looking at states and evaluating what is going to be effective and where we should go, what we're really taking into consideration is our members, and they're the ones that are driving this.
Can you walk us through a little bit about what happened in Rhode Island and how this came about? Because it took a couple of years that was actually building on lots of grassroots work with the AORN chapters and probably the Rhode Island Nurses Association and just strong partnerships there. But I understand in the past 2 years it was really effective.
Yeah, so the bill was first introduced in 2017, and that required us working with the Rhode Island State Nurses Association to identify a sponsor, and we were lucky enough in Rhode Island to have some really great nursing champions that were there and understood the importance of keeping our nurses healthy. So once the bill was introduced, it then had to go through several different committee hearings. We had to do our homework around explaining again what surgical smoke is, how it's created, the experiences that nurses have with it, and then the dangerous effects. So there were a lot of one-on-one meetings that myself and some of our members attended. Again, there was hearings where some of the nurses stepped up and were able to testify and explain to those on the health committees what this actually was.
Can you say what specifically the legislation said or the bill said?
So the great thing about this bill is it's actually only a couple of pages long versus some of the other legislation that's out there. But the key takeaways are that it required facilities, so licensed hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers, to adopt policies ensuring the elimination of surgical smoke by use of surgical smoke evacuators. And the second important part of the bill is that it requires facilities to notify the Department of Health of those adoption of policies.
What pushback did you encounter, or how did you guys have to craft the case?
Really, the biggest challenge was education, was explaining what happens in an OR, walking through what is surgical smoke and how it's created and how easy it is to mitigate those dangerous effects. So it was less about pushback and more about spending the time that was needed to explain something that most people aren't aware of.
That's great. Congratulations on that. Where are things bubbling up across the country then?
Well, with Rhode Island passing this legislation, they really set national precedent, and we are hoping that other states follow that and put the safety of their surgical staff ahead of the other issues, or we put it at the forefront, I should say.
Do you see
where we're seeing it bubble up is it legislatively in Colorado. There was a bill that was introduced in earlier this year. There's a lot of awareness that's just coming about across the country because of this. I think people, again, are starting to understand that there are consequences to breathing in surgical smoke and just in general becoming aware of it. And then California, the California OSHA, so their equivalent of OSHA is called Cal OSHA. They are pulling together an advisory meeting in the fall of this year to look at whether regulations are needed on this subject.
That's great.
Policies, whether it be legislation or regulation, are being made daily that impact nurses. And so it's really important to recognize that nurses, especially peri-op nurses, when we're talking about surgical smoke, they have a powerful voice that needs to be at the table and is quite effective in having conversations. And if you're looking to stay informed, I mean, the first part of being a person that takes action is to know what's going on. So you can look to your professional association like AORN or to your state nurses association for information. But also, we're happy to provide you with advocacy tools. There are trainings that we have out there. There is webinars. There are handbooks. There's a lot of information that we make available to empower nurses to be sitting at the table when it comes to policy making.
After they're in AORN, what would be some of the next steps?
The next step would be to contact Government Affairs. Contact myself. Our contact information is on the website, and learn about what's going on in your state. So we can do that over the phone. Again, I think another step would be to join the National Legislative Forum. And then also AORN has an invaluable service to our members in that anybody can log in to AORN's website and click on their specific state, whether that be Colorado, California, Wyoming, and learn about any type of bills that AORN is tracking that's within our policy agenda. So any type of policy that may be impacting the perioperative profession. They can figure out who their elected officials are by clicking on the Find Your Elected Official button. They can read up on news that is specific to their state and to issues that are impacting them. And then they can also get our contact information to learn how to become involved and take action. So we also have action alerts that they can take that are very easy online, providing them with an overview of what is happening with an issue, and then what they can do to be effective. So sometimes that's calling their legislators, sometimes that's writing an email, sometimes that is sharing their story with AORN, so we can get that out to other stakeholders.
That's fantastic. Can you think of anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
Well, if anybody's interested in participating in the Go Clear Award, to get more information, it's just aorn.org.goclear. On that site, you can just request more information or you can register for the program. And I would highly encourage everyone to check out the site and register. We'd love to have you as part of the program.
That's great. So thanks
Thank
again
you.
for joining us at
Thank
Friends of
you.
Flow. And so we'll sign off for this episode. I'm Tess, Judge Ellis, and keep your eye on the patient.
This is Andy Witters telling you to innovate, agitate, and educate.
And this is Rebecca Porter from Canada. And I say, as a Canadian, keep your stick on the ice.
All right. Signing out.
This podcast is sponsored by Ethicon US LLC. The information contained in this podcast and findings and conclusions expressed are those reached independently by the authors. Copyright 2018 Ethicon US LLC. All rights reserved.
Well, welcome everybody. This is Friends of Flow, and my name is Tess Judge Ellis.
I'm Rebecca Porter.
And I'm Andrew Witters.
And we're excited today for some special guests that are all the way from Michigan. Right, so I'm going to let Rebecca take it over.
I'm really pleased to introduce Tiffany and Kathy of the Henry Ford Hospital, winners of the Go Clear Award, and they're going to be talking about surgical smoke evacuation.
Thank you, and thanks for having us. We're really pleased to be with you. My name is Kathy Osgood. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President of Patient Care Services at Wyandotte Henry Ford Hospital. I've been with the organization for just a little bit over a year and a half now. I come to the area living south of here in Monroe, having worked in various southeastern Michigan hospitals for over 30 years. I won't give you details because that'll tell my age. And mostly in ED and critical care as well as nursing administration. So I'm really happy to join you. Tiff?
Well, I'm Tiffany Cherney. I'm the Regional Director for Surgical Services and Trauma. I've been at Henry Ford this time for about 8 years. I was a paramedic in the ER earlier, then in about 2000, left, went work the road, then decided, hey, let's try this nursing thing. All the cool kids are nurses.
That's the truth, though.
Kathy, how did you know you wanted to go into administration? Was that always your bent?
No. You know, when you're in nursing school, that's not something that usually as a brand new nurse you end up saying, I want to be an administrator.
Yeah.
I've always known I wanted to be a nurse. It's one of those things that I think that you have a calling for. And I did brief stints in college to try out other things like a teacher for a short period of time, and went, if I ever want to have my own children, I cannot be a teacher. And I always came back to nursing. I really dug into my nursing career. Blessed to also have some wonderful children and do some side stints then after I had those children in case management and some hospice on the side, which made me become a better nurse. Once I understood the world outside of critical care, I think you could say blossomed as a nurse, and then got tapped on the shoulder to say, oh, hey, our director's leaving. Would you mind taking over for a little while? It'll just be interim.
The famous word, interim.
So that's when I truly did embrace leadership, and did not dream in my wildest dreams that I could ever be a chief nursing officer. I was the nurse at the bedside still in my mind as a critical care nurse, as an educator, as a CNS, just trying to impact patient care. But the more I stayed in leadership, the more I embraced it, because I really do think that as a leader, we have an obligation to become servant leaders and to humbly influence our patients. So that's how I got here.
What I love is how nursing, you can do so many things, and that your story talks about, like, well, they needed me. Sure, I can try this.
Yeah, I really see what you're doing, Kathy, is being an advocate for nurses. And as nurses, we talk about being advocates for our patients, but our code of ethics, and that's what I do for the rest of my life is ethics. The code of ethics really calls for us to advocate for nurses as well. And I think this kind of dovetails into our topic today a little bit in terms of smoke plume evacuation. And I see you as leaders in this area, and we're kind of interested in how did that come to be? Why smoke plume evacuation for you?
I'll hand this one off to Tiffany.
You know, the thing is, surgical smoke has been around ever since you could literally And it was ever since we started trying to sort out how to make that little bleeder stop in a more efficient way instead of someone putting their finger on it. So as things progressed, more is better, and everybody just said, you know what, if I want that efficiency, I'm going to be dealing with some bad stuff. And is it really bad? We're burning tissue. We deal with this burning stuff. And so it just became part of our culture to accept it. I was at a conference, and they started talking about smoke evacuation, and AORN was talking about this new program called Go Clear. But I'm like, what is this? Let's just find out. What is the smoke evacuation stuff? This is bad. So I'm an outsider coming in going, wait a minute, this isn't making much sense. And bring it back to my team, and my team goes, Tiffany, this doesn't make sense, but we struggle with this every day. So we started this conversation of just isn't right. And it's something that only really recently our profession has just said, hey, heads up, guys. This is not something we should be accepting.
So who is on your team? Who is on your team when you say that?
Okay, so my OR manager, first off, Sharon Larkin, my clinical coordinators. As far as setting up the leadership, I absolutely made sure my senior leadership team was on board, Kathy and our chief operating officer. Then I started engaging our surgeon leadership, because as I saw it, we were the final piece.
I'm interested in Kathy's perspective on when Tiffany came to you. And do you remember that, when she came to you, and what happened then? And because you're like the grand dame there at the CNO. You're at the what they call the C-suite. And so that's a big deal. And I mean, that might be a little intimidating for some, of our younger nurses. But
and did you take the science and literature with you, or, Tiffany, or we're asking a lot of questions. I just want to know the very practical step by step.
I could have brought her a pile this big, but one thing I'm very big in is I do what I call one-sheet wonders. Mm-hmm. And I do an executive summary. And because I know that thing is that I can use that to sell that all the way from Kathy to anybody, but I'm only going to get her attention for one sheet. And so I took her one of those one-sheet wonders that had the facts, that had the business case on it, and all the goals, outcomes, and handed it over to Kathy. Bright colors, big pictures. That always helps.
There's research that goes behind it, and Tiffany, being a very highly engaged leader who also has her DNP, she understands how to do that presentation, right? So she knows what I'm going to be asking for. What's the patient outcomes that we're going to see? What's the impact on the staff, the surgeons? Have you brought together the multidisciplinary team to make sure that everybody's voice is heard? What is the fiscal impact? What is the timeline of implementation? What is the cost of the instruments? Are the surgeons on board? What is their feedback? And then she's saying the one-sheet wonder. I love it because it's everything in a snapshot that then provides the basis for what I bring to the senior leadership team, or we bring to the senior leadership team. And I already know the questions that everybody's going to ask, from the finance department all the way through supply chain.
So how did you take that to the C-suite then, Kathy?
Every week we meet, and I bring whatever one-sheet wonders that Tiff is bringing me for the week, because we all give our own update. And I have a surgical services update that I give to the senior leadership team every Monday. So when Tiffany and I meet, that it's a natural progression that anything new that's coming along gets presented there.
Right about this time, we had become a sole source facility with Ethicon. And so we're like, okay, so, well, we kind of have to go this route, but we were really blessed because we had this, our site rep, and I hope I'm not slaughtering his title because I won't slaughter his name. His name is Steven. And Steven
Gotcha.
really sat there, and it was about a partnership. It was kind of like a little game where we tried to conquer as we went. And we took it service line by service line, and then we did surgeon by surgeon within that service line. And Stephen made it as a constant. He constantly was looking for the roadblocks and knew that we were aligned. And what was so cool about it was there was no excuse. That was what was so neat, because one of the biggest excuses that people had was, this doesn't feel right, it's not natural. But then it was like, well, let me get you an extension. Well, this isn't right, let's try this one and this. This is too loud. Did you move it here or did you move it down one? So that aligned with the way we had done our layers of implementation.
So you were already thinking about resistance to change.
This is the future. This is now. Let's all move forward together. This is it. We're not going back. And so we were able to align with the Ethicon team to help us establish that new future. Our leadership team, our staff was already there. Our staff was already in that new future because that's what they wanted. They wanted that smoke evacuation. The more we kept doing, and then partnering with AORN that gave us that framework. They said, here's a policy based on best practices. Here is education that is intense and tells you just the realities of it. Here's standards you should do with audits. That's the other cool part of this Go Clear program. So we're looking at audits, we're looking at policies, education, and then surgeon commitment. That's the other piece too. Surgeons and anesthesia commitment that they're going to be using smoke evacuation. Everything kept so smooth sailing. It became that way because we had all these little tools to help us just keep heading toward that goal, and that light at the tunnel kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was awesome.
That real-time intervention with the surgeons is probably one of the biggest key factors in the success. So that partnership in real time really helped them be successful.
And that was something else that your partnership with Ethicon and Stephen, then your rep, was able to facilitate?
Yes, because Stephen would hear at that time that a surgeon would go, I can't use this, it doesn't give me the extension I need. Boom, we'd handle that. I just can't, I don't like this drape, here's this, boom. I mean, truly, one of the times, one of the guys says, this smoke evacuator's too loud. I can't do this smoke evacuator thing, it's too loud. He goes, here, let me move this one shelf down. And all of a sudden, it made it miraculously better. I'm like, so it was in removing barriers. And only a couple times, but that's why when I talk about those layers, so when they made it to me, there was a couple of surgeons that said, we will not, so it made it to me. I had that courageous conversation with them. But because I was aligned with senior leadership, they weren't going to go running down to the C-suite saying, I'm not going to use this, I'm not going to use this. No, everyone was aligned and educated and dedicated to the right goal. That's what made this so impactful, and I think it's been a secret to the way we've sustained this. So.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
All the way up to the president.
One of the issues is always, how do we sustain a new program that everybody will eventually buy in, but then it's so easy to slip back into how we always did things. And so how do you sustain that energy and sustain the use of the smoke evacuator?
So there's two ways. One we did was before we even started, and that's why we had leadership engaged in this. That's why we had everyone educated. We used the framework with policy procedure. But when we're dealing with especially medical disposables, you got to have supply chain aligned with this. So when you're looking at pre-packs and you're looking at sole vendors and that, supply chain has to be at your hip. So one thing we found in surgery was that a standard bovie, or our standard little smoke plume thingy, was going to come in every one of our major kits. Critical.
And truly, from a senior leadership standpoint, the entire team, from the chief medical officer to the president to the COO, to finance to human resources, we're all on the same page to be supportive It's not the heavy-handed senior leadership team saying, you shall do this. It's how do we support this process in the right way? And going down the whole high reliability journey, this is the right thing to do, and how do we make it consistent for every patient every time supports what Tiffany and her team are doing.
Yes.
So what sort of outcomes? I'm curious as to how long you've been smoke-free, and then the outcomes that you've seen, both just in employee satisfaction, fiscally, and such.
So first off, the big thing is we remain over 90% smoke-free. We would, some of our initial surveys said we were 93%. Now I can name you one surgeon and his 2 cases that it's done. I mean, this is just, they're an exception to the rule than being the rule.
That's an amazing
And this has been-
accomplishment.
And so we're 11 ORs, 3 procedure rooms, our ASC is, and then plus this is also down in our OB as well. So this is in our 2 OB ORs. So the whole hospital went at the same time. We said that was because I have some of the OB guys that would go up in my neck of the woods when we were trying to set this up, and then they'd go downstairs and they're like, oh, we don't have to use that. And God bless my OB leadership, because they were like, what are y'all doing up there? Yeah. And so that alignment helped. And as far as outcomes, we continue to have the lowest turnover and I'm so proud of this, the lowest turnover in our hospital. We get maybe 1 opening a year, and that's because our staff sees us as a team and a family, and that's what's helped so much, is that we make investments like this.
I'm going to jump in, but that
Yeah.
saves money too, right? Are you guys from training new nurses and such? That's phenomenal. But go ahead.
Right, and the impact on and having a stable team that they can rely on each other and know what each other's next move is going to be is probably the biggest safety culture move that we could possibly make.
You guys had asked me the question, how did you build credibility? How did you this? And I still remember the staff meeting when I said, hey guys, we're going to be doing this Go Clear Award. We're all aligned. We're ready to do this. And one of my more tenured nurses raised her hand and said, you mean, okay, so we've known this has been bad for a while, and y'all just choosing to do something about this now. I got it. You know what? I got it. And then I said, you know what? I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't understand. But now I do. It's not acceptable, and it shouldn't be acceptable to you. And everyone in the room was like, yeah, because I don't know if they really started to realize until we launched on this journey that it was bad, but just how unacceptable it is. And so once everybody got in that framework, boom.
How long have you guys been at 90% or above?
We are we're about a year and a half now.
That's awesome. That's just so inspirational. I really think it is, because and this goes a little shout out to our listeners too. I mean, to all of our nursing leadership, including executives, but our students that are listening, including our colleagues in the ORs. I think this is a call out to engage with processes that either need change or that something you feel passionate about. Don't be afraid to engage, because this is what it can turn into, something amazing.
So when you think about our listeners and who's going to be listening to our podcast, places that don't have a smoke evacuation, what's your best advice of where to start?
AORN.
Yeah.
Start there. Look at the toolkit and the program, and that really gives you the basis and the outline of where to start. Also, if there's a way to partner with other hospitals that have done this already, connect with them. Connect with other nurses, OR nurses, so that we can help share that knowledge and some of the successes and barriers.
So I have a specific question about when you're implementing this in the hospital setting. What were there certain specialties that had a harder time accepting the process because of something maybe procedural?
One that seemed to get us was anything around the spine.
Yeah, I see.
Because the spine was the biggie, because it was all about the reach and the feel and the comfort. That was the great benefit of the partnership with Stephen and Ethicon, because They sat there and said, this doesn't work. Well, I know this piece. Well, this doesn't work. I know this. So that's anything around the spine, automatically, one, it's change, and those guys are very regimented in their processes, but two, the comfort and the access and the angle is key. The great news was we overcame every one.
Who are the ones that were the quickest to perhaps adapt to a new type of product like this, based on the procedure that was being done?
It was a tie. Actually, my general ortho and general surgery, they were just all in. If any, I have to give a little bit more props to my general ortho, because he was the one going, I don't want that bovie anywhere in my room. Why is this bovie in my room? Giving it away.
That's awesome.
I want the smoke evacuator. And so then general surgery saw that this was all that was the standard, and then they're like, well, no, it's us. It's our turn. So, yep.
So here's a question for you. How is this filtering into other areas of your health system? You kind of talked about it a little bit, but how is that process going on?
We remain a role model, and we're not going back. That's why our sister facilities are moving forward, learning from some of the lessons we've talked about, and we've set up supply chain things that make them up for success. We've got the partnership with Ethicon.
Was it really necessary to have a policy? And,
So we chose to do a guideline. We chose to use the evidence-based framework provided by AORN, and we tweaked it to things that were very appropriate to our facility. One thing that I had to kind of acquiesce to, and that was, instead of saying must use smoke evacuation, it says should use smoke evacuation in all procedures where possible. I had to take out that must. I'm a big fan of must because that would have given me some teeth. But the should is strong enough to where I refer to that as a guy and I've had to do that once it passed. But then it was huge. When at the OR committee, Kathy was there, our chief operating officer, Peter, was there. I had several surgeon representatives and anesthesia representatives. So when I brought that guideline forward, I said, hey, here it is. This is it. We're making the big commitment. This is kind of the official stamp of what we've been doing. And it passed everybody 100% to the affirmative. It passed quickly. There was no big discussion other than long time coming. Should have been doing this. This is the right investment. So it was kind of a nice little bow.
That's awesome.
And it's a good thing to showcase to the rest of the departments within the hospital. This is what you can do. This is what your voice being brought forward can do and change. And you have the power. Be the change yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to do it.
And that's great, because we typically end our podcasts on pearls of wisdom or motivational comments to have. And so
what are your pearls now going forward? Pearls of wisdom to folks who may want to move forward with and hear the call to move forward with smoke plume evacuation.
So I don't know, Kathy's was pretty good, but I'll just, speaking first off, just you got to commit.
Right.
Just commit. If you're putting the patient at the center, put your staff at the center, and you just commit. This is the right thing. And also, commit and don't look back. Mm-hmm. Don't lower your standard. Find the right partner. You got to find the right partner in this. That's in the suite. That's in the vendor that you choose, and that is at the staff. They are all your partners in this success. You just don't look back. Find the right people, and it's all about the future. Don't worry about the culture that's been around for years. That's yesterday. Look forward.
Yeah.
Well, we have to say a big thank you to you guys out there in Michigan.
Oh, thank you.
a big thank you.
A thank you to Kathy Osgood for taking the time, and to Tiffany Cherney as well. We really appreciate this, and it's been great fun talking to you and learning about your journey, and for me, learning about smoke evacuation. So thank you.
All right.
So thank you. Thanks for asking us.
You're welcome. So we're going to sign off on this podcast edition of Friends of Flow, and I'm Tess Judge Ellis.
Rebecca Porter.
And this is Andy Witters telling you to innovate, agitate, and educate.
I say keep your eye on the patient.
And as a Canadian, I say, keep your stick on the ice.
This podcast is sponsored by Ethicon US LLC. The information contained in this podcast and findings and conclusions expressed are those reached independently by the authors. Copyright 2018 Ethicon US LLC. All rights reserved.